Hello once again, my inquisitive, extraordinary, powerful scholars. We're back. We're learning about the Civil War. Go ahead and write down Civil War notes at the top of the next available page in your journals. Let's do it. So if you missed class, we're doing things a little bit differently for exactly what you have to write down. I'm going to have pages that say summary page, and you need every single word that is written on the summary page written down. And just like normal, you need the bolded words, the bolded underlined words, and the definitions that follow. So to understand the Civil War, first you got to understand slavery in America. And I know this can be a very difficult subject to talk about, but if we want to get to the roots of why this conflict happened and what led up to it, then we have to know a little bit more about slavery in the United States. So it was the base of the Southern economy all the way up until the Civil War. From the time that the first slaves set foot in America in 1619, large plantations made huge profits because they weren't having to pay for labor. That was the base of how the cotton farming grew to be the largest in the world, was in the South of the United States. And because it was so important, there was a lot of fear of any possibility that someone might try and take it away. And the people that might have been trying to take it away were called abolitionists. They were people who believed slavery was wrong for one reason or another. A lot of people for religious reasons were abolitionists. Other people for humanitarian reasons, just thinking that they were also people, they deserved better. So they were so reliant on this institution. It was actually called the Peculiar Institution, which means odd, the odd institution. A lot of people didn't like using the word slavery in political speeches or in Congress or even just in normal conversation. So it was often referred to as the Peculiar Institution so that it would be not having to say the word slavery out loud. So during the Revolution and even earlier than then, people were talking about getting rid of slavery. It had been a conversation for a very long time, but a strong movement, a strong organized movement really started in the 1830s, and it made the Southern slave owners scared. It was the base of the Southern economy. The Southern economy sent out 75% of the world's cotton to the rest of the world and made a huge amount of money doing so. But they were only able to make so much money because of slave labor. Now, these abolitionist movements scared the Southerners. You can go ahead and pause right now to get the definition of abolitionist movement. So this is our first summary slide. First thing we need down, the entire Southern economy was based on slavery. No matter what we're talking about, slavery was a base of it. If you're growing the food, it was grown and picked, or growing any crops, it was grown and picked by a slave. If you're shipping it out of Louisiana or any other big port in the South, all of that work would have been done by an enslaved person. The functioning of the South wouldn't have happened without that. Second bullet point, from the Southern perspective, if slavery ever ended, it would mean an end to their way of life. The Southern way of life would go away. Everything, all the normal institutions that they had would go away if slavery ever disappeared. And that leads us to the third one. Southerners feared that Northern abolitionists would try and get rid of slavery if they ever were given the chance. Thus, the South really strongly tried to keep power in the United States. From the time that we had our first president, Abraham Lincoln, to the Civil War was 72 years. For 49 of those years, a Southerner was the president. Now, there was a much smaller population in the South. There were less states in the South. But even with that, the majority of our presidents came from the South and honestly were slave owning. And for another 10 years, the people who won office who were Northerners were actually only won because they had made a deal with the Democratic Party, and the Democrat Party at that time was based in the South. So, second bullet point, 2/3 of all the speakers of the House of Representatives. The Speaker of the House of Representatives is the person in charge of the House of Representatives. Whichever party has the most people, they get to elect whichever speaker or leader that they want. So 2/3 of the people who ran half of Congress were Southerners. All 72 years, Southerners were the majority on the Supreme Court. All of those 72 years, the Southerners, whenever a bill that might have been unconstitutional came before the Supreme Court, it was mostly Southerners who were looking at it. And arguments can be made over whether or not they tried to get this power only to save the institution of slavery. I don't think that's a good enough argument. I think they also wanted power for themselves for other reasons. But they definitely used this power to defend and help slavery expand outside of just the original southern states. As the United States grew west, so did slavery in most of the southern states and eventually up into some more northern border states like Missouri. But each year the South became a little bit less powerful. The northern United States had a much faster growing population, and there were many reasons why the far out west territories and states weren't allowing slavery. And Southerners saw their power slipping away. All of this 72 years they had spent with a pretty tight grip on power that gave them a lot of ability to make compromises. Even though they were the minority, they had a lot of the power. They saw it slipping away, though. And they saw abolitionists taking a little bit more power. As early as we know, the earliest talk of secession. Secession means the action of formally breaking away from some sort of organization. So when we talk about it in United States history, we're talking about states trying to break away from the United States. So individual states deciding that they no longer want to be part of the United States. So the earliest time that we've heard of that was in the early 1830s. Some radical Southerners, I believe they were in South Carolina, start talking about secession as a way that they're going to be able to protect their slavery-based way of life. Now, to slow down for a second, the big goal is keeping the way of life. The way of life is based on creating a huge amount of very cheap goods, cotton, tobacco, cash crops that quickly make money. Making quick money on those was based on slavery. So they saw abolitionists and Northerners who they felt were abolitionists slowly getting more and more power, and it continued to make them more and more scared that they would try and do something to make slavery go away. So my summary slide. From the time our country was founded to the Civil War, Southerners had been in control of the national government. Just a fact. 72 years, where in all three branches there was a lot of Southerners, much more than their proportion of the country. And as that control began to be less strong, that led a few Southerners to think they might take away slavery. We should probably consider seceding. We might want to consider seceding from the Union. Now, the election of 1860 was the final nail in the coffin. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. They thought Abraham Lincoln was 1,000% going to get rid of the institution of slavery, or at least he was going to try and slowly weaken it so that by the time of his terms being done, or the president who follows him terms being done, it would be completely over. Now, Lincoln did not run on ending slavery. Lincoln was a lawyer. He did not think that slavery could legally be ended, but he did not think that slavery should be allowed to enter any more territories. He thought that's where it should stop. A lot of Southerners heard him say that, but did not believe him. They said he's going to try and first stop us from expanding slavery. Now, they saw Lincoln as stopping slavery from expanding into these territories as being the first step. Once the Republicans slowed down slavery a little bit, the Southern Democrats, the Southern slave owners, believed they would start moving more and more and more towards fully abolishing slavery, making it go away forever. They thought that this was just an act by the Republican Party so that they could eventually make slavery go away. And if slavery went away, the South believed that the entire Southern way of life would fully change. So, after the election of 1860, the Southern states saw a Republican president, a Republican who didn't want slavery to keep on expanding. They decided now is the time we have to jump ship. We have to protect this institution that is the base of our entire livelihoods. If you look at the map on the screen right now, it's showing the order that different states seceded following the election of Abraham Lincoln. South Carolina was the first. There was a couple deep South states that did it very quickly, pretty much before the end of 1860, so only a month or so after the election happened. Before Abraham Lincoln even came into office, they were saying that he was going to try and take away slavery, and thus it's time to get out. At this point, it's really important to know that the states that stayed in the United States started being called collectively, as a whole, the Union. The states that broke away became known as the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy. If we continued to watch this little animation, it would then show all the different territories coming back into the Union after the war ends, but we'll talk about Reconstruction next week. So discussing question number 1, what about Abraham Lincoln's election caused the 11 southern states to secede? You're going to have to look back at the to summarize slides, maybe think a little bit, listen to what I'm saying, answer the question. So go ahead and pause, write down this question, and answer it. Alrighty. So my summary slide kind of answers that question. Southern fears that Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans would use their power to abolish slavery and destroy the Southern way of life caused the Confederate States to secede. If you don't believe me, then that is perfectly fair. There is a lot of different reasons, and there's a lot of different arguments that are made for why the Southern states seceded. The ones you're going to hear the most often are states' rights. The Southern states felt as though their rights as states were being abused by the North, by the Republican Party. While there are arguments to be made for that, it, for me, and with the research that I've done, feels impossible to make those arguments if it's not connected to issues of slavery. The states' rights issues that they super strongly care about almost always come back to slavery, and they're perfectly fine with northern states losing some of their rights because it's not about slavery. But in class, we're going to read the Declaration of Causes for secession. Now this is pretty much Texas's Declaration of Independence from the United States in 1861 that explains why they're breaking off. You're going to need to pause this video right now, get down the definition of Declaration of Causes. If you would like, you can have a little sneak peek. This top quote is a quote from the Vice President of the Confederate States of America, right very soon after the Confederate States were established. And then this bottom quote is from the Texas Declaration of Causes that we're going to be reading in full on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. So you can pause and read them if you would like. Now for the war itself, we're going to cover it pretty in-depth in class on Thursday and Friday, but I just wanted to show you like two boxers about to walk into a ring. This is how it looked. The Union had 18 million people. 18 million. The Confederacy had about 9 million total people, and if you subtract out the people who were enslaved in the Confederacy, it's only 5.5 million. That's going to be difficult. Agriculture, as far as producing food that could be consumed, which is very important for fighting a war, the Union made 400 million bushels of corn and 100 million bushels of wheat. The Confederacy made a lot less food, which is going to make it difficult for them. The big advantage as far as resources is that the South was much more spread out. The Union, all the northern states, were about half the total size of all the southern states. But as far as modern industry, the Union had about 20,000 miles of railroad, 100,000 factories, and 1 million factory workers. This also carries over into military strength. The Union, at its highest point, had 2.6 million soldiers, or total over the war, excuse me. Over the war, the Confederacy had anywhere from 7,500,000 to 1.2 million. All right, you should look in the comments. I've got a question up there that I'm going to ask and I'm going to take answers for it. Bye-bye.